Yeah. Which isn't too bad.
And we stopped.
Yes.
We're actually
Just give us 1 second here.
I've never been, and I really loved it. And
Can you hear me okay? You might turn your mic on so we can do a quick audio check.
Yeah.
That's a nice little trip.
It was.
And you kind of progressively got cooler.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
You might turn your mic on so we can do a quick audio check.
Yeah. That's nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh.
Are you getting any vacation?
Actually, at the end of September, I'm going to London and Greece.
Try one more time.
Sounds amazing.
Hi, Jesse.
So I'll
Do you
make
mind
sure to
turning
send
your
that
mic on?
to you right before.
Okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Then you
Yes,
have
that's
time
right.
to
Thank
review,
you.
and I'll be like,
Whatever. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. So off to do that.
We can unmute and close the door or something, right? Yeah, we're ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, I think we're going to get started here. We do have quorum. There's 1 or 2 more people that might be attending or joining us late. And I'm sitting at a boardroom table by myself, so all of our committee members, just so you know, you're all online. So if you could possibly turn your cameras on, that would be helpful just to see when we're making motions. And also, if you want to first and second a motion, that would be appreciated. So I'll call the meeting to order at 10:01 a.m. And the first item on the agenda is actually, we've got a couple new committee members. So we'll start with introducing, we'll possibly actually do a full roundtable because there's 3 of you that are new. I'll start with the ones that have been on the committee for a while. Maybe Lynn, if you wanted to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to start, and then I'll sort of go around the screen.
Hi, I'm Lynn Atchison, and I represent the technology stuff, I guess, on this. I was at Boeing for 17 years and recently have my own business and been in Abbotsford for about 30 years.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Jesse, did you want to go next? Oh, I don't think we can't quite hear you, so I don't know if you.
You guys hear me now?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Awesome. My name's Jesse Gill. I'm born and raised in Abbotsford. I'm a local realtor here in the Fraser Valley. I've been on this committee for a little while now. That's it. And also, I do sit on the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board as well.
Great, thank you so much. Jared, did you want to go next?
Hey, I'm Jared. I'm a dairy farmer in Mashpee Prairie, and I've been on this committee for 2 years now. And I previously sat on the BC Agriculture Council, BC Dairy Association, and Mainland Milk Producers. I've taken a step back from a lot of those in the last couple of years, just with having children and all that, trying to spend more time. But I really enjoy this hearing about the local stuff on this committee. So here I am.
Thank you, and we'll jump to Alex.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Mitchell. I lead the team at the Abbotsford Chamber of Commerce. I think I've been on this committee for a year and a half now, so nice to see you all.
Thanks, Alex. One of our new members is Tanya. Tanya, did you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself?
Unmute. There we go. Hi, Tanya Curtis. I'm new to the committee. I work with Alex actually on Abbotsford Tourism, sit on the board there. Formerly of High Street, I ran High Street for 10 years, and now I work for District Group, which is a developer out of Vancouver. That's me. Happy to join.
Thanks, nice to have you, and we'll go to Craig.
Hi everyone, my name is Craig Newmort. I'm a certified financial planner. I've been with TD Wealth for about 25 years. I'm originally from Montreal, and I've lived in Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, and then naturally Abbotsford for the past 9 years. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Craig. Great, so we'll just jump into things. I know everyone has a lot on their plate. So item number 2 is the adoption of the agenda. There's a recommendation that the agenda be adopted. Does somebody want to make that motion? Lynn, seconded by Alex, and all in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. Item number 3 is adoption of minutes from the June 20th meeting. Does anyone want to move to adopt those minutes? Lynn, and seconded by Jared. All in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries. There's no presentations or delegations, but we have a couple staff reports. So item 6.1 is the Planning and Development Services mid-year report, and Blake from the city is going to go ahead and start that.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, committee. This is our 2024 mid-year report. So this is a bit of a health and wellness check and then what's happening in planning and development services. For those of you that don't know, planning and development services is kind of divided into 3 components, that being development planning, community planning, and the building division. So this presentation will touch on each of the activities of those 3 departments. So starting with development planning, 2024 has been a busy year so far. In terms of total number of applications received, we are already close to the 2023 total for number of applications received. We have 189 that are received so far to date, and 195 were received all of last year. Over the last couple of months, we have noticed a sizable increase in the number of applications, and we believe this was primarily driven by policy changes by the province that were associated with the small-scale multifamily housing. During the consultation on those regulations, the city did contemplate increasing the minimum lot size to 540 meters squared for all new subdivisions, and that spurred a whole bunch of new infill-style development that was below that threshold. So we did receive a whole bunch of applications. Subsequently, the city chose not to move forward with that policy at this time, and so there's been a slight decrease in interest for that application type. In terms of notable applications received, on the right, you do see an OCP amendment rezoning and development permit application on Pine Street for a 135-unit, 6-story apartment building. This is being completed under the policy that the city has in the OCP for institutional land uses. Any property that does have that designation can choose to undergo an OCP amendment to acquire an adjacent land use. So in this instance, they're choosing to acquire the Urban 1 mid-rise land use designation and completing an apartment development. On the left is a second apartment style 42-unit development. Multifamily continues to lead the way for us, and due to affordability, I think this 6-story wood frame product is probably going to continue to be a leader in the development side for us. In terms of in-stream applications, we did see a slight decrease in the number of lots that are in-stream. However, continuing a trend over the last number of years, we are seeing an increase in the number of townhouse and apartment style development that are under review and in-stream with the city. Again, some notable applications. We see a couple of more apartment buildings and 190-unit townhouse development at Ms. Cooper's farm being led by Polygon. Moving into the industrial, commercial, and institutional space, we have seen a decline here. I believe this is primarily driven by the availability of land and completion of major projects in the past. So we had a blip there in 2023, which I believe was primarily driven by the Exchange Business Park on Mount Lehman Road. As that land starts to develop, we will probably see these numbers continue to decline back towards the 5-year average. Interestingly, institutional has picked up. The planning department does not see these permits and approvals as they don't require form and character, but we will see this as a theme throughout this presentation today that those numbers are generally up. Again, some notable projects here include phase 2 at the Exchange Business Park and the first form and character development permit for commercial at the Auto Mall expansion. In terms of total number of residential units approved so far this year, the number already exceeds the 2023 totals. In 2023, we approved approximately 890 units, and we are already seeing at the mid-year report, June 30th date, 929 units approved. This includes new single-family lots and development permits for multifamily. Interestingly, in this data, there was not a single townhouse unit approved. However, by end of year, I do anticipate that we'll be back on track to the 5-year average just due to timing of applications. Again, some notable projects here. On the left, we see a project near Canadian Tire. That's a mixed-use development that includes commercial at grade along a future road connection that's identified in the plan, and 300 units of seniors housing at the village. That project was presented to council through zoning a number of years ago, and now we see the development permit approved and a building permit in queue for that project. In terms of approved ICI applications, again, that's that institutional, commercial, industrial kind of component. We do see a tapering downward. Again, that I believe is due to availability of land and major projects being completed in years past. That said, there is still notable projects occurring, and on the left, we do see a smaller purpose-built industrial building at the end of Old Yale Road. And on the right is a height variance for MEI. This year, we have seen schools and churches and projects around those increasing. So we see the MEI height variance here, but we also have had 2 new school additions move forward at Margaret Stennerson and also at Augustin Traditional. And we have seen development activity occurring around the University of the Fraser Valley, which we will see in a moment. In terms of the issued building permits, moving into the building division now, we are on track to be in and around the 5-year average, although we've seen a slight decrease year to date over last year. In terms of key trends here, I think we do see the institutional already at year-end kind of values on the right side of this chart with 11 permits issued. Industrial continues to be strong. We do see a drop in single family. There's some other trends there as well, but mostly we're on track with a few changes and tweaks along the way. In terms of issued building permits, the graph on the left kind of shows single family is down from 2023, and it'll be a struggle to get to the 5-year average this year. Townhomes are strong and apartments continue to be strong, and we anticipate those will be above the 5-year average moving forward. Overall, though, the building division is having a terrific year in terms of value. This, again, is driven mostly by those institutional kind of components. Very large project at UFV student housing project, and we can see that in the institutional category here, which is already over 120 million in value year to date. We've exceeded last year's total already at the mid-year report by 41 million and have 521 million in construction value issued for construction. Some notable projects on the left is the Vitalis development out on Mount Lehman Road, very large industrial application. The King Road project is the UFV student housing project. And then again on the right is one that we saw earlier in the development permit realm. It's a building permit for a mixed use 134 unit apartment development. Moving into our community planning team, they continue to be very busy with projects and initiatives. The OCP update is ongoing. Consultation occurred in Q2, and they are preparing to move forward to council with next steps in Q4. The building division is continuing with their digital service delivery improvements through the D3 project, and phase 2 includes plumbing and sprinkler permits and moving those into digital applications. Community planning has continued to work through a variety of housing policies as mandated by the province, including reporting and other initiatives to meet our legislative obligations there. Commercial truck parking has been a topic that's been a challenge for us for many years, and we're presently in the process of completing a commercial truck parking strategy. And finally, with my division, the development application review process, which started last year and is ongoing, is coming to the end, and we hope to be in front of council with next steps and a work plan associated with that, hopefully by year end. To conclude today's presentation, we heard lots from the provincial government about provincial housing targets, and Abbotsford was one of the first communities to have these targets. We are now reporting on where we're at in that process, and this figure here tries to articulate that. So we issued occupancy and final inspections for 403 new units. That is the metric that the province wants us to use to communicate how much new housing is available in our community. However, we also think it's important to note and understand what's going on around the building permit process. So we have 710 units that have been approved through the rezoning, development permit, building permit processes that are not yet occupied. So that occupies that second approximately 1,000 units of that bar graph. And then we have additional 2,600 units that are approved in principle, waiting for final completion fees and that sort of thing to issue permits, which takes us to approximately 3,500 units that are in stream and essentially ready to move forward into the construction phases of development. Overall, we think that this is fairly positive and represents a pretty marked step towards what the province is trying to do with increasing housing supply. So that concludes today's summary presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Great. I can see you all now, I think. So does anyone have any questions or comments on the report? Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
You touched a little bit on, I guess, like the provincial requirements for more housing. What is, I guess, like the city of Abbotsford doing right now? Like, you can have 4 units per lot type of a deal. Are we following suit with that, or is that just on hold right now?
Thanks, Jesse. Great question. Through the chair, this city has adopted those zoning regulations, and those zoning permissions now do exist to accommodate 4 units. There are conditions, and when somebody satisfies all those conditions, they would be entitled to a building permit. So that initiative is complete and ongoing. With the OCP, we do envision going back into those regulations and having a sober second look at the intent and what we have, and seeing if there's further permissions that we can unlock or provide through the OCP update.
Do you have a follow-up question, Jesse, or is that, you're good? Okay. Any other questions?
Jared might have had one.
Oh, Jared, did you have something?
Oh, I was just gonna say that you mentioned the Vitalis plant, and I just wanted to commend the city of Abbotsford for approving that, because that's a big deal for local dairy farmers and for local agriculture, providing that second layer of value to the industry, because we need a place to send our milk to before we can move it off to consumers. So appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, there's some good things happening in there in the report, and a lot of progress, and things are moving. So I appreciate that, Blake. I don't see any other questions or comments. So I guess we'll go ahead to the second report, which is item 6.2, the new amenity cost charges bylaw and proposed updates to the DCC and CAC policy. And just so those who are online, I can't see if there's questions partway through the report, but usually for the new members, it does keep things moving smoothly if we just run through the report first and then do questions or comments after. So hopefully everyone's okay with that. And if not, you can talk to me after because I can't see you. Go ahead.
Thank you. All right, so as mentioned on the slide here, we're talking about primarily an update to our DCC rates, proposed update. Along with that, we're talking about amenity cost charges. So that's like a DCC for development cost charges, an ACC for amenity cost charges, and also community amenity contributions, CAC. So if I get tongue-tied with all these similar acronyms, you can understand why. So next few slides here, talk about what we're going to do. We'll talk about why are we bringing this forward now. We'll talk about what the approach was we're taking to the DCC update, and then the ACC update is very similar, you'll see as we go through this. We'll also explain why once we update or bring in place this new ACC option, that it requires that we change our existing CAC, the community amenity contribution policy that we had previously. So we'll talk through all of those details. We'll talk about some comparisons with proposed new rates versus existing rates, and then also comparisons with other communities. So I think I mentioned provincial legislative landscape has changed. The province brought forward legislation that gives us more flexibility in our development cost charges. They introduced this new thing called amenity cost charges, which is very similar to a DCC, gives us more flexibility that way. And then I mentioned as a result of those, we'll be changing the community amenity contribution that we currently have in place. And of course, the whole purpose of this presentation today is we're looking for feedback and comments on the proposals. So quick context, looking at these three acronyms here, the DCCs, development cost charges, are charges that are levied on development to help pay for growth-related infrastructure. Council last updated its full DCC bylaw in December 2021, and that was with an effective date of January 1st, 2022. And there was a small update to the rates with a consumer price index increase of 6.8% in 2023. The ACCs, the amenity cost charges, I mentioned new legislation from the province, entirely new thing, but it's structured mechanically very, very similar to DCCs. What it does is it allows us more types of things that we can collect money towards funding the growth-related portion of certain projects. And we're talking about social, cultural, heritage, recreational types of facilities. And we'll get into that in a little bit more in a bit. The CACs, Community Amenity Contributions, is a policy that Council adopted last September, and that has a lot of overlap with what we are looking to do now with the ACCs. And so we've got some changes we're going to be proposing there because we do need to make sure there's no overlap and duplication in what we're charging for. So firstly, I'll mention that Abbotsford Council successfully lobbied the province on changing its legislation with respect to DCCs and what was permitted to be put in there, specifically with respect to highway interchanges. And I don't know if anyone was around for that 2021 update. The city had initially put highway interchanges into the DCC program at that point in time. When that bylaw was put past the province says, no, you can't have those in there. We took them out. But we're actually bringing them back in now because the legislation has now been clearly updated to say that Abbotsford is permitted to put those in. So that's one of the things that's bringing updates forward right now. There's also new legislation that expands what DCCs can be charged for. I mentioned the ACCs is kind of like DCCs and provides more flexibility that way too. And then having to change the CACs. Of course, the last thing, and by no means the least, another reason for doing this all now is because of the significant increases we've seen in construction costs over the last few years. And so we're doing this in order to try to keep the rates up to date with what we're seeing in terms of construction costs. So this is a visual of development cost charges. And on the left side of that table, we see what can currently be charged for. We've got 5 categories there. I'll mention that both sewage and water are really divided, each of those into 2 separate ones. Sewage is divided into collection and treatment, and then water is also divided into distribution and treatment. So it shows 5, there's technically 7 categories that we have existing right now, and the new legislation said that the city is now permitted to add in facilities related to fire protection, to policing, solid waste and recycling, and then I've already mentioned the highway facilities. That's the interchanges I mentioned. Amenity cost charges, just another slide saying what I think I've already kind of said. Community centers, recreation centers, library, daycares, public squares are the types of things that are covered by this. You can think of it as a similar type of thing to DCCs. We're just calling it amenity cost charges. It's almost exactly the same. This visual here, it gives us a picture of where we're at, and that's the existing row, the top row. The bottom row, the Bill 46, is what we're proposing to move to. So the top one you see on the development cost charges box, we've got those 5 categories you saw on the previous slide. If you look down below that to the Bill 46 line, we've added highway facilities, emergency services, and then waste and recycling to represent what's now available to us. So we're looking at taking advantage of that. If you go back to the top row, the existing row, and you look at the CACs, the community amenity contributions and density bonusing, the funds that come out of those fees are currently by council policy allocated to a number of different areas. So emergency services, culture, recreation, and affordable housing. We've got some arrows happening there. So the emergency services, we already mentioned, is now permissible to charge as a DCC. We're going to take the charge that we're currently using through the CACs and bring that down to development cost charges. We're going to reduce the community amenity charge as a result, so we're not duplicating. Same type of thing going on with culture and recreation. Those types of facilities can now be collected under the new amenity cost charge, the new ACC legislation. So we're going to do that. we're going to take it out of the existing CAC and reduce that rate. That leaves one category left there, affordable housing. It has nowhere to go, so we're going to leave it as a CAC density bonusing item, and that will be the only thing left there, but with a reduced rate on that CAC charge. Okay, so overview of approach. We'll talk about DCCs first, very similar to ACCs when we get there. But when we're talking about DCCs, the approach that we took this time is, I've already mentioned we needed to update for cost escalations. So that's one of the things that we've looked at. What do we have to do to increase project costs to be reflective of current realities? The second item is the new legislation. I mentioned the ability to add in fire, policing, solid waste categories. So we've looked at what was relevant there. Small scale multi-unit housing, this is more of an administrative type of thing. Blake mentioned in the previous presentation, these are one of the categories that now exists. We had to find a place to put that into the DCC program. And so that's another reason for this update, is to make sure that was reflected administratively. The last thing I'll mention here, point number 3, is that we haven't changed anything else. When we do a full-scale DCC update, we'll go back and look at growth assumptions and projections. We'll look at benefit allocations, how much of each project is related to growth. We'll look at municipal assist factor and open all that and open it all up and look at it. For this update, we wanted to keep things relatively simple. We kept all of those assumptions the same and really focused on the first 2 items there. Okay, so first talking about that cost inflation. The city went back and looked at all the projects that we have in our DCC programs. Those DCC projects were put into the program based on the 2018 master plans that were developed. And there's a little bit of update to those costs, but not a lot. I mentioned a 6.8% increase that we did the 1 year, but in between coming up with those project values and today, you can see, looking at the building construction price indexes is one objective external measurement we looked at, but a significant increase over the last number of years. The city also went in and looked at our own data, looked at our own projects, the budgets that we had set back years ago, and looked at the tender prices that we've seen over the last few years, and we were getting very similar results. And so what's resulted is on the average for an awful lot of our projects, we've had to build in a 50% inflationary factor, and that's simply to reflect the current realities of what the costs of our infrastructure are. Okay, so that's the DCCs. Looking at the ACCs now, and I mentioned this behaves very, very similar to DCCs, the mechanics, the legislation. Because we haven't had the ability to add in these types of facilities in the past, we couldn't look to an old ACC bylaw. We didn't have one. We went back to the master plan developed by Parks, Recreation, and Culture and took projects that have already been on the books for years as being part of our long-term plans for recreational infrastructure. So we went there, found the highest priorities, and identified those, and we'll have those on a future slide here. We took a similar approach. We wanted to make sure the approach we were taking was consistent with the policy approved by council in September of last year through the community amenity charge program, because as I mentioned, there's some overlap between those two. And similar to the DCC program, we're taking the same projections for growth and using those. We took the same process in determining benefit allocation, what portion of each project is related to growth, and we took the same assist factor. So keeping all of those things consistent. And that was the approach for the ACC bylaw. So I'll dive into some details on the DCC program here. A reminder here, another visual, the types of categories, the 7 actually that we already have, and then the 3 that are available to be added. So when we looked through these new categories, there are some fire halls that were added. There was a little bit of police space on that's part of the new building, building that out that we were able to add. When we looked at solid waste and recycling facilities, there was nothing in our current plans that is at a stage where it's able or relevant to be added. So that's something we'll continue to look at as we go through, say, the OCP and the master plan updates that are working on over the next couple of years, but there's nothing at this time we're adding in that category. Okay, so DCC bylaw updates. The proposed rates follow the same land use categories as the existing DCC bylaw, with the one exception we had to add in the small scale multi-unit housing. That's as a result of that new legislation. So we've slid that into using the same or equivalent rates as the townhouse rate category. It's really an administrative thing for how we charge out those rates. The capital projects are largely the same with the exceptions I already mentioned of the interchanges and those new categories. There were some places where we identified that there were some new projects that needed to be added. The total value of those new projects is about 1% of the total aggregated DCC programs, but there were a few in parks and a few in transportation that we added. But by far, the main changes to the program were the cost inflation, the highway projects, and the fire halls and policing. Okay, so this is a high-level view of the cost summary for the DCC program. You see all of the different categories on the left there, the 7 existing, the 3 new ones, and the total, first column, total capital costs for those programs is the total estimated cost of those projects. The second column is the amount of those projects that is deemed to be related to growth. It's serving new residents, not serving existing residents. So that's the amount collectible through the DCCs, and that was $993 million. The municipal costs is the amount that's then borne by regular funding sources, typically taxation or user rates from existing residents. So we take that growth recoverable amount, the $93 million, we split it through all of those different land use categories, and we get our DCC rates. So on this side, we've got the comparison of the current rates and the proposed new rates, the left and the right there. And then the last column on the right is the percentage change. You'll see that most of them have worked out to give 50% give or take, somewhere around that range. I'll just point out the 2 that really stand out. They're commercial and institutional. You see are up around 80%. What's happening here is not every land use category inherits charges from DCCs. And so example, most of like the residential ones will have parks DCCs included, commercial and institutional do not. So they have a much heavier weighting of things like transportation where they had the new highway interchanges. And so these are really weighted average increases when we look at that percentage change, and that's why there's that difference in commercial and institutional. All right, we've got some comparisons with other cities here for a number of different land use categories. So before I start going through those slides, we're just looking at single detached here. There's 2 things that I'm going to bring out on this slide. Is one in Burnaby and Abbotsford are the only 2 bars you can see that have a red section on them, and maybe a very, very small blue one if you can see that. Abbotsford and Burnaby are the only 2 cities on this slide that have enacted that new legislation and included DCC charges for police and fire and potentially solid waste. I'm not sure if there's any of that in here. But the point being that once these other cities catch up with that, take advantage of that, we can expect to see their rates likely go up when they incorporate those. The second thing I'll point out is that Mission is the oldest one on here. Their rates were last updated in 2022, and my understanding is that they are currently in the midst of a process to update their rates. So trying to keep those types of things in mind when we're doing our best to do apples to apples comparisons here. So now going through those different land use categories, on the single detached, you can see that with the new rate, Abbotsford leapfrogs past Mission, at least for the time being, still remains lower than the other 4 there, Langley Township, Coquitlam, Burnaby, and Surrey. On the townhouse side of things, Abbotsford goes past Chilliwack and Mission, although barely past Mission. On apartments, Abbotsford increases there, but still lower than all the other cities on our comparator group. With commercial, same type of thing happening there. You can see the Abbotsford rate going up between our existing and proposed, but still lower than the other ones and still higher than Chilliwack. Industrial, again, same type of thing. Abbotsford increasing, but maintaining its relative ranking next to those other cities. And then institutional is one where Abbotsford does leapfrog past a few of those cities. Okay, I'll get into the ACC program now, the amenity cost charge program. This is that one with the recreational type of infrastructure. As we're getting into there, the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually the CAC program, the existing community amenity contribution program and density bonusing, because there's this overlap. So we want to address the overlap. Right now, you see the rates that are being charged as a result of this program. The next slide I'm going to show is going to show the breakdown of where the monies that are achieved from that program are dedicated. And so we've got 35% of those funds going to affordable housing, And then we've got 50% going to recreational and cultural, and then 15 going to emergency service amenities. So to repeat a point I made earlier here, those bottom 3 categories are categories that are now covered under the ACC or the new DCC legislation. We're taking them out of this charge. We're reducing the charge down to only that 35% component. So it'll be a 65% decrease in this fee. We're keeping the 35% because there's no other place for that affordable housing component to go, and we need to keep that. So this is a comparison of the current rate and the future rate. So I mentioned the future rate that's being proposed is 65% less than the current rate, and that's just reflecting the realignment of those projects. Okay, when we get to ACC, one thing I'll mention very briefly here is the CAC program right now did not identify specific projects. It identified general categories of spending. The ACC program, the new legislation requires, similar to the DCC program, that we identify specific projects. And so the projects on this screen are the ones that have been identified. These came out of the 2018 Parks, Recreation, and Culture Master Plan. If you look down at the bottom table, this is very similar to the DCC slide I showed previously. We've got total capital costs for these 5 areas, $305 million. The growth-related portion of these projects is $110 million, and so that's the amount that's recoverable through this particular charge. This is a slide straight out of the PRC 2018 Master Plan. This is just showing that these items were included in that years ago, have been considered priorities of the city. I will say that, of course, the dollar values on this particular slide are significantly less than what we've included because this slide was developed 6 years ago. So proposed ACC rates are shown here. They're broken down the same way that our DCC rates are broken down. We don't have any comparator rates for prior rates, of course, because this is brand new legislation, and it doesn't map exactly one-to-one to the CAC that it's replacing. But these are the rates that are being charged there. And we do have some comparisons with other cities. We don't have nearly as many as we do with the DCCs, of course, because this is brand new legislation. So, but we were able to compare it to Burnaby, and you saw some Burnaby comparisons on a previous slide. We have District of North Van listed here, and I'll mention that those rates are subject to change. Those were not adopted, those were just proposed at the time. But you see on the per unit, the single detached townhouse apartment, that Abbotsford ranks very low in terms of the level of its fee compared to the others. And then we have the other land use categories on the right, where there's a variety of different comparisons there. We've also taken the ACCs and added those to the DCCs and done a comparison against those 2 cities. And we've done it for a number of different land use categories as well. So this is single detached. When we are able to compare it to those 2 other cities, you see that Abbotsford is well under those other 2. For townhouses, Abbotsford is actually less than half. And then for apartments, lower yet. So it covers most of the details and the comparative information. I'll mention that in-stream applications have a form of protection applied to them that has existed before in DCCs. It's the same thing now for the DCCs and for ACCs. So new DCC and ACC rates will be effective at bylaw adoption or at an effective date specified in the bylaw. The legislation provides protection to any applications that have been received prior to the adoption of the new DCC bylaw. So if those things are in prior to the adoption, they qualify for the protection and they will receive the old rates as long as, and those 2 criteria at the bottom, building permits and subdivision must be granted within 1 year of bylaw adoption, and rezoning and development permit applications must result in building permit issuance within 1 year of bylaw adoption. Last piece of contextual information here is we've taken a look at the total value of these fees and compared them to typical costs of, in this case, an apartment and a single detached dwelling to get a big picture type of a view of what these reflect in terms of the percentage of a development. So for apartments, we came out with 8% of a typical apartment value is what these fees represent. And then for single detached, it's approximately 6% of the total value of a single detached. All right, so I mentioned this presentation is being done to this committee. It's being done to a number of other committees throughout September. We're looking for feedback as we go through this process. We have Let's Talk Abbotsford page that's easily accessible off of the main page there with a form you can fill out or an email address that goes to our General Manager of Finance and Procurement. You can provide any feedback you like there if there's things that you think of after this meeting. And we are aiming to bring a bylaw to council in October of this year. That concludes the presentation. Happy to answer questions. And I apologize, I forgot to mention this earlier. We do have Jen Waite here from Urban Systems, who has been very instrumental in helping us develop these proposed bylaws and is also able to answer questions.
Great. Are there any questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead, Lynn. You can jump on in.
How long do you think these new rates will be in effect? I mean, when do you think you'll be needing to bump them up again in the future?
We generally would ideally like to be able to do mini updates, perhaps on an annual basis, and it depends on what we're seeing in terms of cost escalations. The legislation does allow for simple CPI updates on a fairly regular basis. The more thorough updates, we are expecting a very thorough update when we're complete our master plans. And I think the previous presentation mentioned that the OCP update is currently underway. When that's complete, or as it's completing, we'll be starting work on master plans. And so I think those might be 2 or 3 years out that we'll see a more comprehensive update.
Any other questions? I know it was a lot of information. Go ahead, Tanya.
Hi, just a quick question, more of a communications question actually, is just like, how do you disseminate this information and break it down in the way you did today was really great and really clear for me. Just wondering how you start to communicate out these changes.
Yeah, so like a large part of it is the meetings with committees. And I mentioned we have 4 different committees, this one included, that we are presenting to. The Let's Talk Abbotsford page has a number of attachments and documents on it that try to make it clear for people to understand. And so those are probably the 2 primary avenues that we're using.
Did you have a follow-up with that, Tanya? Does that answer your question? Yeah? Jesse, I see you had one as well. Go ahead.
With the proposed changes, do you feel like it's going to deter developers coming into the city to build at all, or no?
I think one of the things that we did on that second last slide I presented was we do take a look at what percentage of the total cost is being made up of fees. We're sensitive to how much impact that might have, and that's also why we do those comparisons to numerous other cities. I think we're comfortable at this stage. Obviously, higher fees are, all things being equal, not necessarily going to invite people here, but we are also trying to make sure that we are in a reasonable place compared to other cities. And I think those comparisons show that we are, for the most part, remaining very competitive with the other cities on that in our comparator group. Oh, and
just to add on to what Randy's saying, we find that typically with the structure of DCCs and ACCs, since it's an already agreed upon cost, developers are able to consider that in their performance when looking to develop. So the clarity and the consistency with application of those tend to be looked upon favorably for developers.
Yeah, you have a follow-up? Go for it.
I guess my only concern with that is, even if the developer agrees to move forward with their projects, it's the end user who's going to be buying the project that's really going to be paying for it. So, I mean, when it comes to affordability as a whole, it's already hard as it is for someone to go and buy a single family home or townhouse, with the cost of land being so much, and then now the new proposed ACC and DCC, it's really the consumer that's going to end up paying. I think that's just my
Yeah, that's a fair comment. So definitely noted. I guess a follow-up for myself, the question then would be, should we not implement or should we change, sort of shift directions, then how would that impact our larger projects that we have that you mentioned on some of the slides? Like how with the funding for those projects, which we've said the inflationary increase is about 50% or so, does that just fall on through taxation, or would council need to then reevaluate those projects moving forward? I'm just kind of flipping to see what's the alternative to.
I'll try taking a stab at that. So I think if you're referring to projects that were presented earlier, like specific ones that are already in the works, we do have that rate protection. So assuming that they are able to get their permits, get their approvals within the year after the bylaw adoption, they would not be seeing any increased fees.
Okay. And then how would it impact though our projects like the PRC? You sort of mentioned some of those projects that the city has along the lines, like how would those projects need to be funded elsewhere through the city, like through taxation, through end users as well, or?
That is the balance that we're striking here, right? So the principle that we've operated by is that growth. So new residents coming in ideally should be funded through those residents coming in. So existing residents should not have to bear the cost of the expansion of the city in a sense. So that's why we've taken the approach we have, that we take anything growth related is funded through development. If we don't do that and we do reduce the cost, then of course the money has to come from somewhere. It shifts onto existing residents, and the taxes need to go up, which then impacts everything. So we have to balance that out. Taxes go up for that. We can't afford to spend it on other stuff. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Does. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Other questions from the committee members? No. I do have one more question. Perhaps I don't know if perhaps the consultant. I know we've on some of the slides we only have comparables to Burnaby and North Vancouver because the other cities haven't looked at AACs. But are there other cities that you're engaging with that are also possibly working through a similar process? Just because we're a bit ahead of the game, it seems like, compared to other cities. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yes, through the chair, we have been in contact ourselves and have noted an increase in requests for proposals or even just direct requests from other clients throughout the entirety of BC to look and evaluate both the updates to the DCC program as well as establishing ACC programs based on the new legislation. So this, the ACCs and the new DCC funding categories are looked at pretty favorably in terms of a funding mechanism due to the changes in the legislation. We're anticipating more buildings going straight to building permit, and these structures allow for more funding to be generated for that growth. So it's been a pretty consistent topic of conversation throughout the province.
Thank you. Any other final questions? No, I don't see anyone. So thanks, Randy, for the presentation. As he mentioned, there's the Let's Talk Abbotsford page. So I know that's open right now. So if there is other comments or feedback or thoughts as you're talking to other people in our community, please send them that way so that we can get that information as we go forward, because it is a important conversation to have, and finding a balance will be key, I think, for this. There's no recommendation, so I'll move on to item number 7, which is new business. Our previous meetings have been really full. We went over, I think, the last one that I was chairing, but I just wanted to do a quick roundtable to see if there's any other new concerns arising from the business community that the city should be aware of, or anything else that you wanted to bring forward. We might not have answers for you, but just an opportunity to share anything that you might want to during this meeting before we wrap up. I see Alex. Go for it, Alex.
I just wanted to highlight something coming up, a new event happening on October 4th, which is Canadian Manufacturing Day. We're really pleased to be partnered with the city's economic development team around executing the first ever manufacturing bus tour. So we'll be going out and touring industry and seeing some of the great homegrown success stories of our local manufacturers, and that'll be an all-day event that is open to the public, not just chamber members. So wanted to spotlight that for this group as well.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, that's exciting. I'm looking forward to attending that one. Any other final comments or questions, concerns to bring forward? I don't see any, so I guess we'll move on to adjournment. The next meeting will be on November the 7th. If you can attend in person, that would be great. I would love somebody else to sit around the table with me, but if not, virtual is great. We needed you all to come online virtually to have quorum, so I really appreciate it, and hopefully the other members will also be able to join us at the next meeting. So I think I just need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Jesse, seconded by, I'll do Craig, because I saw your hand up first. Great, all in favor? Any opposed? And that item carries. Thanks you guys for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple months.